Lord, we want to thank you that your word is a lamp to our feet and a light to our path. I want to thank you, Lord, that so much that contained in the pages of your word are words that give life to us, that help us in our lives, but help us to understand how we fit into the big story of what you're doing in this world. And Lord, we want to thank you for this book of Joshua, and thank you for this series. Thank you for a chance to just learn from the experiences of the people of God in that time. And Lord, I thank you for this Joshua. And I thank you for the way in which you are working in his life and the way in which you have shaped these words this morning for him to share with us. I pray, Lord, you would fill him with your spirit now. And Lord, for us too, may we be those that have ears to hear exactly what it is you want to say to us, and a faith and a courage to respond with action this morning. In Jesus' name. Amen.
Thanks, Ed. I also promised Indiana Jones this morning, so actually just for the first 30 seconds, I'm just going to ask you this question. What is your favourite Indiana Jones film? Just talk to the person next to you for 30 seconds and try and come to a conclusion. Okay. I'm just going to have a really, really quick vote as well, because I'm actually quite interested to see. So if you think Raiders of the Last Ark is your favourite, can you raise your hand? There's a smattering. Temple of Doom? The Last Crusade? Perhaps not. And then The Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. There's one person. I actually feel like quite a few people didn't vote there. It was quite close between the first couple, I think. So if you haven't met me before, I'm Josh, and I promise that will fit in somewhere to the talk later on. I graduated from Bristol over the summer, and I've started work in the last few weeks. And also, I spoke for the first time over the summer, and it's actually great to be back up here again. So I think there's always a bit of nervousness about the first time you preach, because if it goes really badly, you might not get invited back. So the fact that I'm up here probably means a few of you found last time at least a little bit helpful. So let's hope for the same again today. So we're actually in the final part of a 6-week series in the book of Joshua. And if I talk about Joshua this morning, I'm not talking about myself at all. I'm definitely talking about the Joshua in the Bible. Joshua is a book in the Old Testament. It was written thousands of years ago. But as Christians, we really believe, despite that it was written so long ago, it's still really relevant for us today. There's still so much we can take from it, whether you're a Christian or not, and it speaks so much into our lives. Okay, so today we're going to be looking at Joshua's final words. We'll be looking at Indiana Jones as well. We might watch a clip later. And the question that we're going to really try and answer is how we can live a radically devoted life. How we can choose God over idols. And some of the stuff I'm talking about is just experiences I've had in the last few weeks and just really things that God has put on my heart to talk about. If you've got your Bible with you, it'd be great if you could turn to Joshua 24. Just give you a minute to get there. Now Joshua assembled all of the tribes of Israel at Shechem. He summoned the elders, leaders, judges, and officials of Israel. They presented themselves before God. Joshua said to all the people, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Long ago your ancestors, including Terah, the father of Abraham, and Nahor, lived beyond the Euphrates River and worshipped other gods. But I took your father Abraham from the land beyond the Euphrates and led him throughout Canaan and gave him many descendants. I gave him Isaac, and to Isaac I gave Jacob and Esau. I assigned the hill country of Seir to Esau, but Jacob and his family went down to Egypt. Then I sent Moses and Aaron, and I afflicted the Egyptians by what I did there, and I brought you out. When I brought your people out of Egypt, you came to the sea, and the Egyptians pursued them with chariots and horsemen as far as the Red Sea. But they cried to the Lord for help, and he put darkness between you and the Egyptians. He brought the sea over them and covered them. You saw with your own eyes what I did to the Egyptians. Then you lived in the wilderness for a long time. I brought you to the land of the Amorites, who lived east of the Jordan. They fought against you, but I gave them into your hands. I destroyed them before you, and you took possession of their land. When Balak, son of Zippor, the king of Moab, prepared to fight against Israel, he sent Balaam, the son of Beor, to put a curse on you. But I would not listen to Balaam, so he blessed you again and again, and I delivered you out of his hand. Then you crossed the Jordan and came to Jericho. The citizens of Jericho fought against you, as did also the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Girgashites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. But I gave them into your hands. I sent the hornet ahead of you, which drove them out before you, also the 2 Amorite kings. You did not do it with your own sword and bow. So I gave you a land on which you did not toil and cities you did not build, and you live in them, and you eat from vineyards and olive groves that you did not plant. I think that's a pretty amazing passage, and I'm actually not going to touch on it in much detail. And it really summarizes a lot of what has gone on in the book of Joshua. So here Joshua is bringing to all of the people basically this word from God, this amazing list of all that God has done for them. Just in the previous chapter, so in chapter 23, Joshua first speaks to all of the other rulers of Israel, and now he comes to the people to share and deliver this message. It was important to speak to both groups. The leaders themselves have a special responsibility to shepherd the congregation to follow the Lord, but everyone themselves has the personal responsibility to follow God. The personal responsibility is reflected that Joshua brings this message to them as well. And actually, that list, if you haven't been here for the last few weeks, really just covers everything that we've talked about over the last 5 weeks. It's an incredible list of everything God has done during the series. God had cared for the people. He had shown mercy to them. He had done many miracles. I mean, that list of all of the other armies they'd fought against, there were probably 7 or 8 other armies that they defeated on there. It's pretty amazing. He'd saved them from Egypt, and he helped them conquer foreign armies. And he promised to give them land, and he gave them this land as well. We see that God chose Abraham. He decided to make Abraham a great nation of his chosen people. And actually, it wasn't because of Abraham's goodness. It wasn't because he was so much better than everybody else. His family were idol worshippers. It was because of God's own decision, which reflected his character of grace and love. Israel's history also teaches us of God's great patience and long-suffering. Actually, I don't know about you, but these events happened thousands of years ago in a foreign land. And actually, it's foreign people. It's a really foreign situation. I find it difficult to put myself in that position and actually to think and fully recognize what God has done for all of the people there. Now, I don't think I've ever advocated this before, and I probably never will again, and I don't really recommend it at all. But, but basically, imagine if you change those first verses that we've read there. If you, instead of it being basically what God has done for Israel that Joshua was talking about, imagine God gives a message to Joshua and he comes out and tells everybody what he has done for you, what God has personally done for your lives. That instead, it's not a distant people in a distant land thousands of years ago, but actually Joshua comes and just lists everything that God has done in your life. What would it sound like if it was about you, your family, this church? You'd be like your very own personal version of the Bible. I've called it the insert your name here version. Maybe one day we'll have an Ed and Deb version to read. But I actually just think it's a testimony, those first few verses, is a testimony of God's goodness to the people. And there's so much we can learn from it. And actually, you can put yourselves in that position. So if you were here last week, Rob spoke about listing down or writing down all of God's promises. Actually, particularly in the midst of really hard times, that can be something that's so powerful, so useful. And actually, I'd really advocate this as well. Just as well as writing down promises, write down all of the good stuff that God has done. And there's a real power and evidence of God at work through that. We're just going to head a little bit further on in the passage now. Just read a few more verses. So basically, there's a bit of back and forth between sort of Joshua and the people. And then we get to these verses. It's 19 to 24. Joshua said to the people, "You are not able to serve the Lord. He is a holy God. He is a jealous God. He will not forgive your rebellion and your sins. If you forsake the Lord and serve foreign gods, he will turn and bring disaster on you and make an end of you after he's been good to you." But the people said to Joshua, "No, we will serve the Lord." Then Joshua said, "You are witnesses against yourselves that you have chosen to serve the Lord." "Yes, we are witnesses," they replied. "Now then," said Joshua, "throw away the foreign gods that are among you and yield your hearts to the Lord, the God of Israel." And the people said to Joshua, "We will serve the Lord our God and obey him." Now, I did promise Indiana Jones, so we've got a short clip from the first film, I think this is. Hopefully you'll see where this fits in. Indiana Jones is clearly a big fan of idols. He's clearly... It's a good link, I thought. In this case, a very nice gold and shiny one. that he's willing to risk everything for. He's willing to risk his life to get out of that temple. And I want to ask you that question this morning. What is the golden idol in your life? What is the one thing that stops you being totally devoted to God? Or is it even just a barrier for getting started? In a better way, what is the thing or things that get in the way of God? The things that you're willing to risk your relationship with him for. Maybe it's your job, maybe it's studying, maybe it's possessions, maybe it's wealth, or relationship, or any number of things that it could be, which in themselves aren't bad things. Actually, if we watch that clip for the next few minutes as well, it ends with Dr. Jones actually making it out of the temple, only to have the idol confiscated from him by the film's baddie and like all of the minions around. Actually, does our idol have that same sense of disappointment that we think we've escaped, we've managed to sort of get away with whatever it is, and then we end up with that sense of disappointment when actually we get out of the temple and then all of a sudden we still have that frustration, we still have that disappointment that it's been taken away, that it's got in the way of God or our relationship? Do we have that disappointment? Do we have that regret? I personally know there are so many times when I've had that feeling where whatever it is, whatever it might be, just doesn't give you satisfaction. And Joshua here presents the Israelites with a clear choice. They can serve God or they can serve idols. They can obey God or they can't. They cannot serve two masters. They cannot be in God's plan, in his kingdom, and keep their one foot in the world. Actually, nobody can make that decision for them either. Joshua couldn't make it for them. Neither could the elders. The group couldn't make it for the wider group. Each person was faced with that decision themselves, just as we are. I find it interesting just looking back at this bit here. Joshua actually says to the people, and it's quite harsh, I think, you are not able to serve the Lord. He's witnessed so many times their failures. He's seen them time and time again just mess up. And he's questioning, why will this time be any different? Joshua reminds them that true faith has to be accompanied by action as well. And the people make this commitment then to serve the Lord. They commit that this time will be different. And again, that really resonates with me. So there are so many times that I've done that I've committed, yes, this will be the time that I don't screw up. And then you have that back and forth, that internal dilemma that you go from thinking, oh yes, this is the time that I'm going to be committed to God. And then maybe a few days later or even a few hours later, whatever it is comes back to bite you. Whatever gets in the way will just be there again. That you don't feel good enough, that you resolve to do better, but then only return to the golden idol. And actually, I feel like that, and I'm sure many people have that thing in their lives as well. But there is hope. There is hope. We're about halfway through the talk, and I want to get to the main points now, or sort of three main points about how we can try and live a radically devoted life. These are things that have just been really just dropped sort of in my life over the last few weeks by God, and I really do feel and I hope there's some good stuff in there that we can all just take something away. That's, I guess, my prayer for this morning, that one of these things, or maybe more of them, just really sticks with you. So let's go for it. I'm just going to make an apology because Ed, a couple of weeks ago, talked about cycling, and he was talking about the fastest way to get up one of the many hills in Bristol. And I'm briefly going to talk about cycling again. So if there's nothing more than you... But if you can't think of anything worse than cycling, I'm sorry. So this is a photo I took a few weeks ago, and it was on the Downs. It was as the Tour of Britain came through Bristol. And so Team Sky, which is the picture of the bus there, over the last few years, they've been pretty much all conquering in cycling. They've won everything there is to win. Their riders have just been pretty incredible, both on sort of the track and on the road. And they sort of apply something called marginal gains to their cycling to try and get better, try and squeeze every bit of performance they can out of their bikes, out of their riders. So it might be they take the wheels and they try and make them 1% better here and there. Or I even read saw a documentary that when they're on tour, they have their bed set up in exactly the same way every night just to make sure they get the best possible night's sleep, which you think is quite extreme, but also it's clearly worked for them. And you know what as well? I think God approves of marginal gains. Just as a bike can be improved in small areas, percent by percent over the course of time, I really do believe the same thing can be said of our spiritual lives and our walks with God. Be it just gradually increasing the time that you pray, just day by day. It might be a minute extra every day, or actually the time that you spend in worship, or the amount of time that you sort of talk to people about your faith. I think all of those things can just be over the course of time, just gradually built up. Actually, you might start now on like a really small base, but if something you improve over just that course of time, it can make a real difference. Or maybe it's actually just choosing God's will over that golden idol, over those foreign idols. Whatever they might be that take his place, just one extra time a week, just replacing God with, replacing the idol with God. And gradually just whatever is consuming you or whatever is eating away can just be replaced. But most importantly, actually, I think God really celebrates these successes that we have, however small they might seem to us. So that success of actually choosing him over choosing the idol, or choosing to pray over doing something else maybe. However small they seem, I think God really celebrates them. There are a couple of amazing examples that came to mind in the Bible about this. So when Jesus is baptized, after that happens, God looks down from heaven and he says, "This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased." Now, don't you think exactly the same thing happens in heaven every time we choose God's way instead of our own? Don't you think heaven is just looking down? God is looking down like, yes, I am for you. You've chosen well. In the story of the prodigal son, the father absolutely rejoices. So this is when the son has gone off. He's made countless bad decisions. He's chosen to run away, to squander his inheritance. He's made probably thousands of bad decisions. But then when he returns, he makes one good decision, just one good decision to come back to the father. And the father rejoices. The father runs to him. He picks up his tunic and he legs it. And then he has a massive party for him. And he's made literally one good decision out of thousands. So don't we think the same is for us when we choose just that one time to do the right thing, whatever that might be? I think that's a really amazing thought, that actually God celebrates our success. He's not there to put us down if 100 times we choose the one thing once. He doesn't remember the 99 times that we fail. It's the one success that really counts for him. My second point is very much based on my experience of starting work in the last few weeks. It's made this sermon quite hard to prepare for because all of a sudden you don't actually have much free time, is what I found. Yes, definitely student life, I found it easier to prepare for things like this. So I'm working for an engineering company called Atkins, and they've got an office out at Aztec West. If you've ever been there, you'll realise it's quite barren. There's not a great deal out there. There are sort of quite a lot of offices and then sort of one Starbucks between all of them. And I found during my first few weeks that actually the toilets are quite an interesting place to go. It's an interesting one, but they are. And it's not often you say that at all. Again, I probably will never say this again. But on the back of the toilet doors, they have... don't try and read this. I'm not hoping that you can read this at all. They have sort of a thought for the day style message on the doors. And even though this is far too tiny to read, it's just proof that it does actually exist. But this one came up a couple of weeks ago, and it was a weekly challenge to make inclusion part of your everyday. I'm just going to read a small section of it, and you can just see how this has really challenged me. So it says, during Inclusion Week, we'd also like to encourage people who have something about their own perspective and style or identity they would like to share with another individual or team to consider having a courageous conversation about this. This might be a case of someone who has an invisible disability wanting to share with one team member how this affects them. Equally, a courageous conversation may consist of someone explaining to a colleague how something about their backgrounds means they are less comfortable using a certain kind of tech or prefer communication via face-to-face. Whatever the topic, understanding each other and our differences is an important part of developing a positive culture. And you know what? That is a real challenge because, for me, a courageous conversation is sharing my faith. And that's often so difficult. So Joshua 24:15 says this, But if serving the Lord seems undesirable to you, then choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve, whether the gods your ancestors served beyond the Euphrates, or the God of the Amorites, in whose land you are living. But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. Basically, Joshua is saying, no matter what you decide today, no matter what all of the people decided, that he and his family would still serve the Lord. His convictions were his and nobody could change them. And I say this because we ourselves can choose to serve the Lord, even if those around us don't. And so at work, I might be the only Christian within sort of my department. There will be peer pressure. There may be a strong cultural tide against us. Family members might even disagree or persecute you, but no one can make you turn away from God. We have that personal responsibility to make the decision to obey God, no matter what other people think about us. And actually, talking about what you love should be a really natural thing. My girlfriend Arabella's down there. If you haven't met her, I end up talking about her quite an awful lot. My housemates probably get fed up of me. But it's a really natural thing to do. I remember Sam saying back at the start of this series that I think his daughter one time started just at a restaurant talking about God, and Sam was like, ooh, I just wanted to sort of shrivel up almost and just to not be there, not have to answer those questions. But actually, it should be such a natural thing for us to do. And I just want that challenge just to sit with you and just see how it fits. Whether that courageous conversation is something that you really want to pursue. And actually, I'm sure many people already do that. I'm sure many people in this room do have those courageous conversations. And if you do, God celebrates those. But also you can apply marginal gains to that, and you can squeeze that one or two more conversations into your week, I'm sure. And finally, we just need to remember what God has done for us as well on that strive for being more devoted to him. Later in the chapter, we see that the people wrote down a covenant with God. They made a memorial so they couldn't forget all of those things that I listed to start with, those first 13 verses. Because Joshua and the people both knew that they were just really inclined to forget. And if people did not have this tendency, then God wouldn't need to repeat so many of the same themes throughout the Bible. So many things crop up again and again. It's because God knows that we forget. Verse 31 says this: Israel served the Lord throughout the lifetime of Joshua and of the elders who outlived him, who had experienced everything the Lord had done for Israel. So we see that Israel was totally devoted to God for the years that Joshua was alive, the years afterwards as well. They experienced everything that God had done for them. They made this memorial, this covenant. They wrote the things down so that they wouldn't forget, that they would remember them. And today we have that tendency as well to forget. We can write reminders, we can write prayer calendars, Bible reading plans. Those are all really good and helpful things to remind ourselves to pray or to remind ourselves to thank God. And actually, you might be writing your own version of those first 13 verses would be an excellent thing to do as well. It'd be really helpful in helping to remember what God has done. I really hope one of those three things sticks this morning. Whether it's God celebrating our success, whether it's that challenge to be courageous in conversation, whether just really taking time to think back over what God has done in your lives. I really hope one of those just sticks and resonates with you as they have done with me over the last few weeks. And also this morning, if you're in that place of internal dilemma, if you're just going backwards and forwards, you're tearing yourself up about something, that golden idol that you just can't shake, this is a really great time to address it this morning, either personally or with the prayer ministry team as we go back into communion and worship to close. It's a really great time to address that and to recognise that. I do believe we can take so much encouragement, though. God celebrates each of our successes. He's not there to condemn us. He's there to celebrate it with us, however small those successes seem. And just along with this, practice the habit of courageous conversation and remembering what he's done. And they can just serve us so well as we strive for a greater devotion to him. And just as I come to close now, the key part, I guess, of remembering what God has done for us is remembering Jesus' sacrifice on the cross. And just before, I'm just going to pray to close, and then I'll invite Ed back up, and we go into a time of communion, which is a really great way just to remember that as well. Dear Heavenly Father, I thank you for all of the incredible things that you did for the people of Israel. I thank you for those 13 verses, just how time and time again you showed up and you just basically saved the day. I thank you that actually when we think about it, there are so many things that you've done for us as well, even if we don't realise. Even just being here this morning is a success that you're celebrating. Just being sat in this room is a success. And I just really pray that something from this morning will just stick in each of our hearts, and each of our minds will just be drawn to something. Whether it be just that marginal gains, that trying to improve something just by a small amount each week. Be it that just bringing to the fore that internal dilemma to you, whatever it might be, Father. Yeah, I just pray something sits with us and lets it settle on our hearts. And I pray that you'll be at work, Lord. Amen.